Something enormous is happening in the sky above us right now, and it happened so fast that even the experts were caught off guard. Just one night ago, the big computer weather models were showing a hot, stuck, boring end of summer with no changes in sight. Then, almost like flipping a switch, those same models woke up, showing something totally different and totally shocking. A giant weather pattern is now forming way up at the top of the world. This pattern is so big that it stretches all the way from Alaska, across the top of Canada, to the icy edges of Greenland. And this pattern is not staying up there. It is about to reach down and grab the middle of the United States, and it is going to shake things up in a big way. If you have been sweating through hot nights that never seem to cool off, if you keep checking your thermostat wondering when this heat will finally break, you need to hear this. The answer is closer than anyone has told you, and it is coming faster than almost anyone expected. Stick with me, because in the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly what is coming, exactly when it will hit your part of the country, and one surprising twist hidden inside this pattern that most people are going to completely miss. This is the forecast that changed overnight, and by the time this video is over, you are going to understand it better than anyone just reading the headlines. Before we dive in, if you find this helpful, please hit like and subscribe, because it takes a lot of time and research to break down forecasts like this one in a way that actually makes sense, and your support helps us keep doing it. Now let us get into what is really going on, starting with the part that matters most to you, and then I will show you the machine working behind the scenes, because how this happens is just as amazing as what is happening. Way up above us, higher than airplanes fly, there's a fast river of wind that circles the entire globe. We call it the jet stream. Normally, this river of wind flows quickly from west to east, and it drags weather systems along with it one after another, like leaves floating down a stream. This keeps weather moving along instead of getting stuck in one place. But every once in a while, something strange happens. A giant area of high pressure drops into the jet stream like a huge boulder falling into a river, and when that happens, the flow of wind cannot go straight through anymore. It has to bend around the boulder, it buckles, it twists into giant loops, and inside those loops, cold air that is usually locked up in the Arctic suddenly finds a wide open door leading south. This is called a blocking pattern, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Something is blocking the normal flow of weather. What makes this moment so unusual and so worth talking about is that not one, but two of these giant boulders are dropping into the jet stream at the same time. That almost never happens, and when it does, it changes weather for millions of people all at once. Let me get specific here, because the details matter. Forecasters watch a handful of important measurements to figure out when something big like this is about to happen, and right now, several of those measurements are all pointing in the exact same direction at the exact same time. That almost never happens by accident. The first measurement is called the North Atlantic Oscillation. This is a fancy name for something simple. It is just a way scientists measure air pressure over the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean, close to Greenland. When that number turns negative, it means high pressure is building up right over Greenland, and that is the first boulder I mentioned a moment ago. The newest data shows that number diving negative right around the 24th of this month, and it looks like it might stay negative all the way into the first few days of September. That is not a tiny blip you can ignore. That is a long, sustained shift in the atmosphere, and it is exactly the kind of setup that pushes cold air toward the eastern half of the United States. The second measurement is called the East Pacific Oscillation. This one controls what happens up near Alaska. When this number goes negative, a big ridge of high pressure balloons up over Alaska and the northeastern Pacific Ocean. That is the second boulder. And here's the part that made forecasters sit up and look twice at their screens. Both of these signals, the one near Greenland and the one near Alaska, are turning negative at almost exactly the same time, in the same narrow window. And when that happens, they do not just add together, they actually make each other stronger. A negative signal near Alaska builds a wall of high pressure on the western side of the country. A negative signal near Greenland builds a wall of high pressure on the eastern side of the country. Now picture this. You have a wall on one side and a wall on the other side, and stuck right in the middle is a pool of cold air with the jet stream buckled around it. That cold air has nowhere left to go except straight down, right into the heart of North America. Now, I promised to always be honest with you in these videos, so I have to tell you something important. There is a real disagreement happening between the big weather models right now, and it actually matters a lot. The two most trusted forecast systems that meteorologists depend on are called the European model and the American model. Think of them like two very experienced ship captains, both looking at the same storm way off on the horizon. Most of the time, these two captains agree on the big picture, and right now, they do agree that a block is forming and that cooler air is heading south. But they do not agree on how strong that block will get, or how far south the cold air will actually reach. The American model is leaning toward a deeper, stronger block that would send much colder air plunging far down the map. The European model sees the same basic shift happening, but it keeps things a little more calm and restrained. It shows cooler weather up north, but it does not send the cold diving nearly as far south. That gap between the two models is the single biggest question mark hanging over this entire forecast right now, and I will circle back to it later, because how that disagreement gets settled decides whether the deep south gets any real break from the heat at all. There is a third piece to this puzzle, and it might be the most important one, because it is the engine sitting underneath everything else we're talking about. Out in the Pacific Ocean, something called El Nino is getting stronger, and it is happening fast. The Climate Prediction Center now says there is more than a 90% chance that this El Nino becomes a very strong event as we move into fall and winter. That is a very big deal, and here is why it connects directly to the weather happening right over your head today. El Nino works by warming up a huge stretch of the tropical Pacific Ocean. When that ocean water warms up, it changes exactly where thunderstorms form near the equator. And when those thunderstorms shift location, they nudge the entire jet stream thousands of miles away into a brand new shape. It sounds almost unbelievable, but it is one of the clearest examples in all of science, showing how the ocean and the sky above us are wired together like a giant machine. The warming Pacific Ocean is helping tilt everything toward exactly the kind of buckled, blocky jet stream pattern that we are watching come together right now. So none of this is random. There is a real driver behind it, a real engine, and that engine is only getting stronger by the day. Now let me paint the picture of how all of this actually plays out day by day, because timing is everything here. Right now, and for the rest of this week, you are already starting to feel the first hints of change in the air. A cooler push of air is sliding through parts of the country, and it is real. It is not your imagination. But here's the catch that trips a lot of people up every single time this happens. This first cool shot is not the main event. It is just a preview, a small taste of what is coming. Every single day, the heat comes right back and rebuilds itself right behind that cool air. So you might wake up to a beautiful, cool morning and then watch the temperature climb right back up into the afternoon like nothing happened. Across the northern part of the country, highs are settling into the 70s in places that had been baking in the 90s just days ago. And that is a genuine, real break. But it comes and it goes. The full pattern has not locked into place just yet. Think of it like a wave pulling back out at the beach before it finally crashes down. It is loading up its energy. The real turn, the big moment that this entire forecast is built around, arrives when we get close to the 25th and 26th of the month. That is when the block finally matures. That is when high pressure fully plants itself up near Alaska and up near Greenland, and the jet stream carves its deepest dip down into the middle of the country. When that happens, a powerful cold front comes barreling south, and this one is not a preview anymore. This is the wave finally crashing down. For the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and the Northeast, we are talking about temperatures running 10 to 15 degrees below average, and in the coldest pockets of air, potentially 20 degrees below average. Just sit with that number for a second. 20 degrees below normal in the final days of August. That is the kind of shift that makes people dig out a jacket they had already packed away for the season. Overnight lows in the coldest spots could tumble down into the 50s, and if the American model's deeper, stronger solution ends up being correct, some places could even flirt with temperatures in the 40s. That would be a real taste of early autumn arriving, while the calendar still says it is summer. Here is a question I really want you to answer down in the comments, because it genuinely helps me shape these forecasts around where you actually live. Tell me your city or your region, and tell me one more thing. Are you the person who is cheering this cold front on, hoping it crashes through as fast as possible? Or are you the person who is not ready to let summer go just yet? I read through these comments myself, and the split is always fascinating, because this exact same weather pattern feels like a rescue to some of you, and a huge disappointment to others. Drop your answer below, and let me know which side of that line you're standing on. Now here comes the twist I promised you at the very beginning of this video, the part that most people are going to completely miss. While all that cool air is flooding into the north and the east, that exact same pattern is doing something almost cruel to the southern part of the country. Remember, when you build a giant block and force the jet stream to buckle, you are not just creating a cold dip on the other side of that buckle, you are also creating a ridge, which is a big dome of heat. And this particular pattern is shoving that heat dome right over the west and the south central states. So at the very same moment, folks up in the Midwest are pulling sweatshirts out of the closet. Folks down in Texas, Oklahoma, the Deep South, and the Desert Southwest are getting hammered by relentless, dangerous heat. This is not some tiny footnote buried in the forecast. The Climate Prediction Center has actually issued a specific warning about extreme heat and fast-forming drought building across the southern United States. That means the ground is going to dry out quickly, the heat is going to feed on itself, and it becomes a real danger, not just an annoying inconvenience. Picture the whole map for a second like a giant seesaw. When you press down hard on one end, The other end shoots straight up into the air. That is exactly what is happening across the entire continent right now. The same atmospheric setup that is delivering wonderful relief to the north is locking a heavy lid of heat over the south. In the hottest zones across the desert southwest, we are still talking about afternoon highs punching past 110 degrees, maybe even 115 degrees. Across the south central states and the southeast, widespread readings over 100 degrees are on the table, with heat index values, which is the number telling you what the air actually feels like on your skin once humidity gets factored in, climbing even higher than that. And the drought risk makes everything worse because dry soil cannot cool itself the way moist ground can. Every single hot day bakes the land a little bit harder, and that baked, hardened land then radiates even more heat back up into the air the very next day. It becomes a feedback loop, a cycle that feeds itself, and once that cycle gets going, it becomes very hard to break. That divide, cool and refreshing weather up north and blistering, dangerous heat down south, is really the true story hidden inside this entire pattern. It is a tale of two very different Americas, separated by a single line drawn across a weather map, and where you happen to live on that line decides pretty much everything about your next 2 weeks. The farther that block pushes the cold front south, the more of the country gets to escape this heat. If the American model turns out to be right and the block goes really deep, that cold front could theoretically push all the way down toward the Gulf as we move into September. That would be a genuine shock to the system for places that have not felt below average temperatures in what feels like forever. But if the European model turns out to be right instead, and the block stays more contained, then the relief mostly stops short, and the South stays locked underneath that heat dome for even longer. This is exactly why I keep hammering on the difference between these two models over and over. It is not some small technical detail. It is the whole ballgame for tens of millions of people across this country. Let me pull back from the big picture for a moment and talk about what is happening right now, today, because a shifting pattern like this one never arrives quietly. When cold air on the move starts colliding with warm, humid air that has been sitting still in one place, the atmosphere reacts, and that reaction shows up as storms. Over the past couple of days, that collision has already produced rounds of rough weather, and the Storm Prediction Center is flagging even more of it as the front continues pushing through. The good news, and I want to be clear and calm about this instead of hyping it up for views, is that this is not shaping up to be a major tornado situation. The main threat coming from these storms is damaging wind along with hail, and I am going to explain exactly why that is, because understanding the why behind a warning actually keeps you safer than just hearing a siren go off. For the middle of this week, forecasters have painted what is called a slight risk of severe storms across the Central Plains, the lower Missouri Valley, and the upper Midwest. In plain, simple language, that means scattered strong storms are likely, and some of them are going to cross the line into becoming officially severe. The setup involves something called steep lapse rates, which is just a fancy way of saying the air cools off very quickly the higher up you go. That kind of setup acts like a ramp for rising air, letting thunderstorms build tall and powerful in a big hurry. Add in a boost of wind higher up in the atmosphere from something called an overnight low-level jet cranking up, and you get storms that can organize themselves into clusters and produce damaging gusts as they race across the landscape. The Storm Prediction Center has been highlighting the chance for wind gusts strong enough to snap tree branches, knock down power lines, and cause scattered power outages that could leave neighborhoods dark for hours at a time. There's also a real hail threat riding along with some of these storms, with a few capable of dropping hailstones large enough to dent cars and damage roofs, and some of the most intense storms possibly exceeding 2 inches across. Geographically, keep an eye on the northern Rockies and the central high plains, where a shortwave, which is just a small ripple of energy moving through the upper atmosphere, dives southeast and lights off storms along the way. Watch the upper Midwest, too, across parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where storms are expected to fire up ahead of the advancing front. These storms may start out as isolated supercells, capable of producing large hail, before they collapse together into a line and turn into more of a wind threat by the evening hours. And keep an eye on the Central Plains and the lower Missouri Valley as well, where storms are expected to cluster together and grow into a larger organized system with real damaging wind potential as it sweeps toward Missouri. Down across Mississippi, Alabama, and into northern Florida, a very moist and unstable air mass is going to support storms too, although the wind shear down there is fairly weak. So those storms tend to be more of the pulse and collapse variety, the kind that still pack a real punch with sudden bursts of wind, even though they do not last very long. Looking one day further ahead, the severe weather threat shifts and organizes itself around parts of the Ozark Plateau and into the Mid-South, with 1 or 2 clusters of storms capable of producing long swaths of damaging wind. There's even a mention of central and southeastern Arizona getting involved, as monsoon moisture interacts with the mountainous terrain out there. The tornado risk on these particular days remains low, generally sitting somewhere around the 2% range, which forecasters classify as a marginal or isolated concern, rather than anything close to a widespread danger. If a brief tornado does happen to spin up, it would most likely be quick and short-lived, rather than one of those long-track monster tornadoes you tend to see during the peak of springtime. Then, heading toward Thursday, the main action nudges into the northern plains, moving from Minnesota into Nebraska and northern Kansas, with large hail standing out as the headline threat, thanks to that combination of strong wind shear, steep lapse rates, and just enough moisture in the air. A separate, smaller threat for locally damaging wind gusts also sets up from eastern Virginia into the Carolinas as a wave of energy crosses over the Appalachian Mountains. I want to give you something practical here, because a forecast is only really useful if it actually changes what you do to stay safe. When storms like these are moving through your area, the single most important thing you can do is have a reliable way to receive warnings even while you are sound asleep. A weather radio, or even the alert system built into your phone, can wake you up the moment a warning gets issued for your exact location. Damaging wind and large hail do not need a tornado attached to them to be genuinely dangerous. A 70-mile-per-hour wind gust can knock a tree straight down onto a house just as easily as a tornado can, and it can just as easily knock out power for an entire town. So please take these storms seriously. Bring in any loose items sitting out in your yard, park your car under some kind of cover if you are able to, and know exactly where the sturdiest interior room of your home is located. It costs you absolutely nothing to be prepared, and being prepared can end up saving you a great deal. Now let me tie these storms back into the bigger picture, because they are not really a separate story on their own. They are the sound of the whole pattern changing right in front of us. Every single one of these fronts marks a boundary between the old air mass and the new one moving in, between the summer weather that is desperately fighting to hang on and the cooler pattern that is trying to take its place. As the block continues to mature over the next week, an upper-level ridge is forecast to expand from the Four Corners region into the southern plains, while the flow of air higher up over the northern plains bends and shifts east across the Midwest and into the northeast. That shift is the true signature of this whole pattern finally coming together. The storms we are seeing this week are really just the friction created by that big transition happening overhead. Once the block fully locks into place and that big cool anomaly settles in over the northern and eastern states around the end of the month, the atmosphere actually calms down quite a bit in those regions because the sharp temperature contrast that fuels these storms moves south, following right along behind the front. Let me talk about the tropics for just a moment, because you may have already heard some chatter online about a system forming out in the Atlantic Ocean, and I want to give you the honest, grounded rate on it rather than a scary one designed just to grab your attention. There's a real possibility of a tropical wave rolling off the coast of Africa and trying to develop out in the Atlantic. But the odds of it turning into something significant that actually threatens land are fairly low right now. And here is the truly fascinating part of this whole story. The very same pattern we have been talking about this entire video is part of the reason why. Remember that strengthening El Nino I mentioned earlier? One of the things a strong El Nino does is crank up the wind shear across the entire Atlantic Ocean. Wind shear happens when winds are blowing at different speeds and in different directions at different heights in the atmosphere, and it is absolutely brutal for a young, developing tropical system. It literally rips the storm apart before it ever gets the chance to organize itself, tilting and shredding apart the tall thunderstorms that a hurricane actually needs in order to survive and grow. On top of that, if the block ends up sending a cold front pushing far enough out over the ocean, it can inject dry, stable air, along with even more wind shear, directly into the path of any tropical wave trying to spin up, effectively pushing it away and keeping it weak. So while the tropics are never something to completely ignore during hurricane season, the entire atmospheric deck is currently stacked against major tropical development right now, and that is a direct result of the same forces that are reshaping your local forecast at this very moment. Here's a good moment for the second thing I want you to weigh in on down in the comments, and this one is really about trust. When two of the best weather forecast models in the entire world disagree the way the American and European models are disagreeing right now, which one do you personally find yourself believing, and why do you believe it? Some of you follow this stuff really closely and already have your own opinion on which model has been performing better lately. Others just want the simple bottom line without all the extra detail. Tell me how you personally handle a forecast when the experts themselves cannot fully agree, because that tension between certainty and honesty really sits at the heart of what makes forecasting such a hard and honestly such an interesting job to do. Let me get really concrete now about the actual temperatures you can expect, because this is what most of you came here to find out. In the immediate term, highs across the central and northern parts of the country are settling into the 70s and 80s, which for a lot of you is a very welcome step down from where things have been. But push a little further into the central and southern states, and you are still looking at readings over 100 degrees, with the southeast sitting in the high 90s to around 100 degrees, and the desert southwest still cooking away past 110 to 115 degrees. And remember, those numbers are just the raw air temperatures. The heat index, which is that feels-like number, runs even higher once humidity gets factored into the equation. And that is exactly why the Climate Prediction Center is warning about extreme heat as a genuine hazard, not just a simple discomfort. As the days tick by one after another, each cold front that swings through knocks the northern temperatures down a notch, but the heat keeps trying to rebuild itself right behind that front. So it becomes a repeating rhythm: cool, then warm again, cool, then warm again, until that big block finally slams the door shut for good. That big moment, the deepest cool shot of the whole pattern, is really the payoff of this entire forecast. And it lands as we cross from next Tuesday and Wednesday into the final days of the month. That is when the coolest air of the season arrives, deeper and colder than the little appetizers we are getting this week, with the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast potentially running 10 to 20 degrees below average, overnight lows sliding down into the 50s, and in the coldest possible scenarios, down into the 40s in a few isolated spots. When forecasters compare the shorter range models against the longer range climate models, there is agreement across the board that cooler air is definitely coming, although the longer range guidance is a touch less aggressive about exactly how deep that cold air ends up diving. That is really the same American versus European tension showing back up again, just in a slightly different form. The overall trend, though, the direction everything is leaning toward, favors the colder outcome for the northern tier, and possibly even a push of that cooler air farther south than we have seen in a very long time, if that stronger block ends up verifying correctly. So who actually ends up where once the dust finally settles on all of this? A large chunk of the northern and central parts of the country land comfortably in the 50s and 60s for their overnight lows, with pleasant, mild days that finally feel like the turn of the season is truly here. The zone that had been stuck sweating in the 90s drops down into the more comfortable 70s. The zone that had been baking away in the 100s may ease down into the 80s instead. But the far south, and especially the desert southwest, sitting directly underneath that heat ridge, stay hot the entire time. And if any relief manages to reach them at all, it comes late, and it comes fairly modest compared to what everyone else gets. Then, as we move into the first third of September, the guidance actually hints that the cold front pushes even deeper than expected, which would extend and expand that relief even further. That is the more optimistic branch of this forecast, and I will be watching it closely, because if it ends up holding true, it means a genuine lasting break for a much larger share of the entire country. Let me step back now and put all of this together into one single clear picture, because I promised you right at the start of this video that you would walk away understanding this better than the headlines, and here is the whole thing wrapped up in one breath. A rare double block is forming, with one dome of high pressure anchoring itself near Alaska, and another dome anchoring near Greenland, both forced into place partly by a rapidly strengthening El Nino out in the Pacific Ocean. The double block buckles the jet stream, carving a deep dip right down the middle of the country, which floods the north and the east with unusually cool air for late August, while at the very same time building a heat ridge that traps dangerous drought-feeding heat over the south and the desert southwest. The clash between that incoming cool air and the lingering summer warmth fires off rounds of storms, mostly driven by wind and hail rather than tornadoes, as the whole pattern rearranges itself overhead. And the single biggest question still hanging over all of this is exactly how far south that cold front ultimately pushes, a question the American and European models are actively arguing over right now, with the deeper, more dramatic solution favored by the American model, and the more restrained, calmer solution held onto by the European model. The reason I feel confident telling you that relief is truly on the way is that the driving signals behind all of this, the negative North Atlantic Oscillation, the negative East Pacific Oscillation, and the strengthening El Nino, are all pointing in the exact same direction at the exact same time. And that kind of agreement across multiple signals is what gives a forecast its real backbone. The reason I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know the exact temperature in your backyard on the very last day of the month is that the true depth of this block is still being sorted out, and this is weather we are talking about, which means it is going to wobble and shift a little bit between now and then. What I can promise you is that I'm going to keep tracking every single new run of these models, every update to those key signals, And I am going to tell you the truth as it continues to evolve. Whether that truth ends up being the cold plunging farther south than we hoped, or the block backing off sooner than we all wanted. If you have made it this far into the video, you now understand a pattern that is about to define the next 2 weeks of weather for tens of millions of people. And you understand it not just as some scary headline, but as an actual working machine, with gears turning all the way from the Pacific Ocean to the top of Greenland to the front porch right outside your own door. That is really the whole point of this channel. Not to scare you, not to hype you up for no reason, but to hand you the real, honest picture so you can plan your life, protect your family, and actually know what is coming and why it is coming. The heat that has felt like it would never end is finally meeting its match, and the door to autumn is cracking open earlier than expected across a big piece of this country. So here is what I am asking from you today. If this video made the forecast clearer for you, please hit that like button, because it genuinely helps more people find honest weather coverage instead of clickbait headlines designed just to scare you. Share this video with someone you know who has been absolutely miserable in this heat, because real relief is on the way, and they deserve to hear about it too. And if you are not already part of this channel, please subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because this pattern is moving fast, the models are updating constantly, and I will be right here breaking down every single twist the moment it happens. Tell me down in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you are ready and excited for this cool down, or whether you are dreading it. And I will see you in the very next video. Stay safe out there. Keep an eye on the sky whenever those storms roll through your area. And remember, the atmosphere just made its big move, and now you know exactly what it means for you and your family. Before we wrap up completely, let me leave you with one more thought to chew on. Weather patterns like this one do not come around very often, and when two separate blocking zones form at the same time, one near Alaska and one near Greenland, it tells meteorologists that something bigger is shifting in the background, not just a single week of weather, but possibly the whole shape of the season ahead. That is part of why so many forecasters are watching this so closely right now. It is not just about whether you need a jacket next Tuesday. It is about whether this early cool shot is a sign of how the rest of autumn and even winter might behave, especially with a strong El Nino sitting underneath everything, quietly pulling the strings from way out in the Pacific Ocean. Strong El Nino winters tend to favor certain storm tracks, certain wet and dry zones, and certain temperature setups across the country. And the fact that we are seeing this kind of dramatic double block show up this early in the season is exactly the kind of clue meteorologists look for when they try to get a jump start on those longer range outlooks. So while the next 2 weeks are the main headline, and rightfully so, because that is what affects your day-to-day life right now, keep in mind that this pattern is also a small preview of a much bigger story that is going to keep unfolding over the coming months. I will be tracking that bigger story right alongside the shorter term forecast, because they are really two sides of the very same coin. The signals feeding into this week's block are some of the very same signals that will help shape the outlooks for October, November, and beyond. And that is exactly why I do not just want you to watch this video and forget about it. I want you to come back as this story develops, because the atmosphere rarely hands us this many strong matching signals all at once. And when it does, it is worth paying close attention to every single update. One last practical note before I let you go. If you live in one of the areas expecting that sharp cool down, take a moment now to think through a few small things. Check on elderly neighbors or family members who might not be following the forecast closely, since sudden temperature swings can be hard on the body, especially after weeks of heat. If you live in the south or the desert southwest, where this pattern is going to trap dangerous heat in place, please take the extra heat seriously, even if it feels like just another hot day. Rapid drought conditions mean the ground is drying out fast, wildfire risk can climb, and heat-related illness becomes a real concern the longer this ridge sits in place without any real break. Stay hydrated, check on pets and outdoor animals, and avoid unnecessary strenuous activity during the hottest parts of the afternoon if you are in one of those areas under the ridge. And if you are in the storm zone this week across the Central Plains, the Upper Midwest, the Ozark Plateau, or anywhere in between, keep your phone charged, keep an eye on official alerts, and do not wait until you hear thunder to figure out where you are going to shelter. A little bit of preparation now saves a lot of stress later, and that is true whether we are talking about a severe thunderstorm warning or a long stretch of dangerous heat. Weather like this, big, sweeping, continent-spanning weather, touches almost everyone in some way, whether that means pulling out a sweater early or bracing for another round of triple-digit heat. Wherever you fall on that map, I hope this breakdown helped you feel a little more prepared and a little more in the know about exactly what is heading your way and why. Thank you so much for watching all the way through this one. It really does mean a lot, and it is exactly what keeps this channel going. I will be back soon with the next update the moment the models shift again, because with a pattern this active, they almost certainly will. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I will see you very soon.